I'm a 28-year-old woman who was engaged to Ron, a 27-year-old man, for a year. We had known each other since college, though we weren't close friends then, before starting to date after graduation. We had been together for 4 years and got engaged last year. We had a small ceremony with close family and friends, including my aunt and her daughter Lucia, who lived with my grandparents after her husband passed away a few years ago. My aunt was quite impressed with Ron during the engagement and couldn't stop praising him for being handsome and successful, which was unusual since she had never been very fond of me. Her daughter Lucia, who is 24, has always been compared to me. Despite being younger and less academically accomplished, Lucia was frequently held up as superior in every way, even though she couldn't pass high school while I was a solid student. The irony was not lost on me. Ron and I were planning our wedding for October, but I had to leave for a summer program in the UK in June. The program lasted 10 weeks, and while we initially talked daily despite the time difference, things started to grow cold between us about 2 weeks in. When I asked Ron what was wrong, he vaguely mentioned being stressed at work, which I chalked up to the distance, and didn't worry about too much since our relationship wasn't new. However, when I returned, I discovered that Ron had ghosted me. To my shock, he had married Lucia, my cousin. My aunt took every opportunity to rub it in, and now Ron is broke and jobless. Lucia kicked him out, and I had to take all our savings. Before my program ended, Ron ghosted me. It felt incredibly childish. He could have faced the situation head-on, but he chose the easier route and just disappeared. There's something about me, call it ego or whatever you like, but I don't chase after people. No matter how hurt I am, I keep my guard up. Ron's ghosting hit me hard, but I didn't show up at his door. Instead, I was naively hoping he'd come to mine. To my shock, it wasn't Ron who showed up, but my aunt with a wedding invitation in hand. I learned that he was marrying my cousin Lucia. In this age of emails, she came with a physical invite, seemingly eager to see my reaction. It was one of the rare moments when I was completely caught off guard. I was stunned. How could he fall for my cousin who struggles to make ends meet? My aunt didn't miss a beat. I'm so sorry, sweetie. I understand you're hurt, but what can we do when people fall out of love? Maybe he couldn't handle the distance. Don't be mad at Lucia. Ron reached out to her because he had nothing else to do after work. You know how beautiful my princess is. You can't blame Ron for falling for her. I looked at her with tearful eyes, unable to respond. Usually I'd cut her off mid-sentence, but this time I was so stunned that I just stared, absorbing her cruelly sugar-coated comments. She added, "Trust me, honey, I love you as much as I love Lucia." In the midst of everything, Ron came to my place and with surprising politeness confessed everything. Ron's confession about his profound love for Lucia was overwhelming. He came across as such a humble and sweet man, one of those old-school gentlemen who goes down on one knee to propose. As I imagined him doing all that my aunt described, tears rolled down my cheeks. Her attempt to comfort me with a hug was met with my rejection. I wiped my tears, stood up, and told her I had things to attend to and needed her to leave. She warned me not to try contacting Ron, revealing that she had blocked me on his behalf. "It wouldn't look good if my son-in-law was in touch with his ex," she said. I retorted, "You and your son-in-law, I've got better things to do than chase after someone who's moved on." She stood up and said, "Don't be disheartened, my dear. I understand it's tough to find another man at your age and with your looks. But don't worry, there are plenty of divorced men seeking a second chance at love. I'm sure you'll find someone good." I yelled, "Get out!" I deeply regretted losing my composure and giving her the satisfaction of seeing me so vulnerable. But we all have weak moments where we can't hold it together. The pain of this revelation was far worse than the ghosting. It would have been one thing if Ron had cheated with someone else, but the fact that it was Lucia made it much harder to handle. I could have cut him off and never seen him again, but now with my aunt potentially showing up to flaunt her daughter's prize in my face, I feel utterly humiliated. Everyone knew about my engagement to Ron, so the story of his marriage to Lucia is out there, and it's clear what happened behind the scenes. My aunt has been spinning a narrative that Ron turned to Lucia because I was too headstrong and egoistic, adding insult to injury. My aunt spread the story that I prioritized my career over Ron. She claimed that Ron didn't want me to go to the UK for the summer program, but I went anyway and cut off contact with him. She even went as far as to say that Ron suspected me of being unfaithful during my time abroad, claiming he heard a man's voice in the background whenever he called. The truth is, I haven't kept in touch with most of my relatives since I moved out, and I've always been distant from them due to their small talk, making it easy for my aunt to spin her lies. It feels awful. I used to tell myself that everything happens for a reason and that there's light at the end of the tunnel. But when you're in the middle of that dark phase, it's nearly impossible to see your way through, even if you know things will eventually get better. Update 1. Hello, and thank you for your support on my previous post. I've been meaning to update for a while now. I promised myself I'd share once I no longer felt anything for my ex, and here we are. I've indeed moved on, and there's even a bit of good news to share. That phase was incredibly dark and long. While I've been through breakups before, this was particularly devastating because Ron was my fiance. My mom stayed with me for a week, and her presence was a great comfort. However, as soon as she left, I felt a deep emptiness. Having spent so many years with Ron, every corner of the city was filled with memories of him, which pushed me to leave. I applied for jobs in the UK and landed a promising position in Leeds. Packing up and moving away has been a fresh start. My tip for anyone struggling to move on from a painful past is that sometimes starting over in a new place is one of the best ways to heal. Yes, a change in scenery can work wonders, but I understand not everyone has the opportunity to move away from their current situation. Nonetheless, relocating to Leeds felt like a fresh start for me. I was surprised by how quickly I managed to move on. Things took an interesting turn a few days ago when my mom called to ask if Ron was still unemployed. I confirmed he was, though technically he had left his job a year ago to pursue his passion for writing. Ron had always wanted to be a writer and was dabbling in it while juggling a full-time job. To support him, I agreed to work full-time while he focused on establishing his writing career with the plan that eventually I would leave my job and we would both work on our own venture. It sounded like an exciting plan, but Ron didn't follow through. My mom was taken aback when I shared these details, and she laughed when she heard that my aunt had recently complained about Ron. Apparently, my aunt had confronted my mom demanding to know why she hadn't mentioned that Ron was essentially unemployed. My mom was confused because the last she knew Ron was doing well. My aunt also revealed that Ron had been pressuring Lucia to take a crash course to get a higher-paying job so she could cover their expenses. Ironically, my aunt had arranged for Ron to marry Lucia so they could rely on his income, but now it seemed like a misplaced plan. The last I heard, Lucia was working part-time as a receptionist handling table reservations. It's unclear how they expect to manage living expenses on that income. I might come off as harsh for looking down on Lucia's job, but honestly, I don't really care. I wish I could have witnessed the look of disappointment and distress on my aunt's face when Ron's true situation came to light. There's another layer to this story. My aunt was actually a mistress of Ron's father. When he passed away, his legal wife kicked her out, which is why my aunt ended up living with my grandparents. They've been relying on my grandparents' pension and occasionally financial help from my dad and uncle. Lucy, on the other hand, has always been somewhat inept. She dropped out of high school after failing twice and ended up with a receptionist job only because my uncle referred her to a friend's restaurant. Nowadays, even receptionist positions usually require a high school diploma. If you think karma has struck them hard, there's more. After I got over the initial shock, it was time for action. Ron and I had invested in a trust fund with the plan of using it for our future business. Since I handled our finances, I had full access to that fund, and I had been contributing around 20% of the total. When I discovered his infidelity, I liquidated the entire fund. Ron has no idea the trust fund is gone. He's still under the illusion that he'll get his share once my anger subsides. He even told Lucia he would reach out to me to claim his 50% of the trust fund. If you think this makes me a fraud, consider this. I supported Ron through some tough times. After he left his full-time job, he struggled to get writing gigs and make ends meet. I gave him access to one of my spare bank accounts to cover his monthly expenses. I did everything I could to support him financially. I believe what I did was fair. Had we been married, I would have received alimony, and the trust fund was a close substitute since we were effectively in a committed relationship. Now I'm curious about his so-called entrepreneurial plans. With no savings and no job, it's no longer my concern. Update 2. This Christmas has been quite satisfying. I finally saw the disappointment on my ex's face. I was at home when Ron showed up knocking on my door demanding his share of the trust fund, specifically 50% of it. I asked which money. He explained that he had put his savings into the trust fund we had set up for our business. I told him, "Oh, that trust fund. I liquidated it." He was outraged. "How could you do that? We saved that money for our business. What are we going to do now?" I responded, "Excuse me, there is no we here. You're my ex, and the person you should be referring to as we is right across the street." He took a deep breath and said, "I know I've hurt you, and you have every right to be angry, but I need that money. I don't have a job. The client I was writing for let me go, and Lucia doesn't earn enough to cover our expenses. I haven't paid rent for the last 2 months, and if I miss one more payment, the landlord's threatening to evict us. Please understand my situation." I retorted, "Why should I understand your situation? Remember what you did to me. Your infidelity doesn't give you the right to demand money," he argued. "Just because I cheated doesn't mean you can take my money," I shouted. "You were only entitled to 20% of the trust fund. Remember the money I gave you for your monthly expenses? I've already taken out your 20% share to balance what I spent on you." He was left speechless, and I felt a sense of closure and relief. He was stunned by my response, and then tried to stay calm, claiming that since I had spent money on him as his girlfriend, I shouldn't now claim it back. By that logic, since he received the trust fund money while he was my boyfriend, he shouldn't ask for it either. He even threatened to sue me for taking his share. I countered by saying that if he pursued legal action, I would press charges for unauthorized use of my debit card, as he had used it for his monthly expenses. I reminded him that if we were to tally up what was owed, he might end up in debt, so he better watch his tone and accept the truth. Fuming, he stormed out with a scowl. As if that wasn't enough, my aunt and Lucia showed up at my parents' house looking for me. They wanted to know about the trust fund money, as Ron had told them that I took his share and now he was broke. I told them it was none of their business and that I wouldn't discuss it with them. Lucia persisted, claiming her future was at stake. I told her the matter was beyond her understanding and advised her to stay out of it. My aunt yelled at me for insulting Lucia, saying I should lower my ego because she was more accomplished given that Ron left me for her. My dad came into the room upon hearing the commotion. Upon seeing him, my aunt tried to downplay the situation, claiming she was just discussing Ron's distress. My dad told her that he had heard everything and warned her that if she raised her voice at me again, he would cut off all financial support he had been providing. He admitted he regretted not intervening sooner, allowing my aunt to humiliate me, but that was over. He told her that if Lucia was so accomplished, she could help Ron manage the household and prevent them from getting locked out. Apparently, my aunt and Lucia were unaware of Ron's dire financial situation and the overdue rent. My aunt was shocked and began to cry in front of my dad, saying that Ron had ruined Lucia's life by failing to provide for her. She was distressed about where they would live if the landlord actually did lock them out and pleaded with me to release Ron's share of the trust fund so he could get his life back on track. My dad, proud of me for standing up for myself, chuckled at my aunt's predicament. He pointed out that she should have considered the consequences before trying to set Ron up with Lucia. He told her that if Lucia was so accomplished, she could have managed her own future. My aunt, who shifts her stance depending on the situation, claimed that Lucia didn't have a father to support her and wasn't educated like I was, so it was her responsibility to look out for her. She lamented that she had hoped Ron would be able to take care of her daughter, but now she was left dealing with the fallout. Lucia, in tears, said I could have informed her about Ron's unemployment, but instead, she was misled into marrying someone who was financially unstable. She acknowledged that I might have had my reasons for keeping the truth hidden. My dad, fed up, told them to leave. They had gone behind my back to pursue Ron, and now had come to my home to flaunt Lucia's so-called victory. And now, as things fell apart, my aunt was blaming me for not disclosing Ron's situation. It was absurd. As they were leaving, I said, "Don't worry about Lucia. There are plenty of people out there who would be happy to shower her with affection and support. I'm sure you'll find someone." I admit it was a harsh remark, but I was tired of their manipulative tactics. Despite my flaws, I was not the one who orchestrated this situation. It all started when my aunt showed up to flaunt Lucia's wedding invitation in my face. I wish I had recorded that moment when she called Ron a loser. He deserved to know how his mother-in-law and wife viewed him. If she could say such things in front of us, she could have said them to his face. It was strangely satisfying to know that Ron was being insulted by his own family. Update 3. Ron reached out to me by mail explaining how badly things have gone for him. He borrowed money from a friend to cover the overdue rent, but defaulted again because his client delayed payment for his gig. As a result, his landlord issued a notice to vacate the house. Ron asked my aunt if they could stay with her for a few months, but my grandparents refused to let them in. Ron was unaware that the house wasn't actually owned by my aunt. They had deceived him into believing it was Lucia's place and that my grandparents were just living there. Ron also revealed that Lucia had lied about her education and job. She had claimed to be a manager at the restaurant, but the truth was quite different. I'm astonished he didn't recognize Lucia's shortcomings during their time together. Did he never have a real conversation with her before getting married, or was it merely a superficial relationship? Ron said he had given up on his dream of writing and was now looking for a job in his previous field. I ignored his first email, but he followed up a few days later with an apology. In his second message, he expressed regret for betraying me and acknowledged that his life had fallen apart as a result. He mentioned that my aunt had taken Lucia with her and insisted that she couldn't let her daughter live with a loser. Knowing my aunt, I believe she orchestrated this situation, and Lucia would follow her lead without question. Update 3. It's clear to me now that Lucia has no mind of her own. She likely didn't love Ron, but followed her mother's plan to win him over. It's fascinating how beauty can hold such power. No matter how much we value intelligence, beauty often has the upper hand, and even the sharpest minds can fall for it. Despite Ron's current state of regret, I have no intention of forgiving him or rekindling anything. He might be apologetic now, but a cheater is always a cheater. While his life is in disarray, partly due to the trust fund issue, I don't regret my actions. I was fair to myself and he made his own choices, which he must now face. I told him not to contact me again and blocked him. I briefly considered letting him know that my aunt might eventually push Lucia back into his life once he secured a better-paying job. But why bother? He shattered my trust by cheating on me with my cousin. His suffering is of no concern to me anymore. I shared his misfortune with my mom, and we had a good laugh about it. She felt satisfied that karma had caught up with them all. Story 2. Hi everyone, this new story involves my girlfriend 21 and me 24. Our quirky situation began when we started watching the Lord of the Rings movies together. We had never seen them before, and after watching the first two films she began imitating Gollum's character in the house. What started as a joke has turned into an ongoing habit. She crawls around like Gollum and even starts grabbing at my clothes, sometimes my crotch, calling it precious, just like in the movies. At first, I found it a bit annoying, but now it's become a playful part of our routine. However, her parents caught her in the act and were quite surprised by her behavior. My girlfriend's behavior, where she constantly refers to my private parts as my precious, has become extremely uncomfortable for me. It started as a joke, but she's even taken to grabbing raw meat and fish out of my hands while I cook. I've told her that this behavior makes me uneasy, and she promised to stop, but it continues. I don't want this issue to end our relationship, but I'm at a loss for how to handle it. Comments. Vin asked my boyfriend if he would leave me if I acted like Gollum, and he replied that I already do in a joking manner. Fractal Factor suggested that maybe she's subtly asking for a commitment, like putting a ring on her finger. While that might be true, it doesn't solve the immediate issue of her behavior. Update. For those who haven't read my previous post, after watching the first two Lord of the Rings movies, my 21-year-old girlfriend started imitating Gollum. I complained about how her actions were crossing my boundaries and feared it might jeopardize our relationship. I've taken your advice to view it as lighthearted fun. After making the initial post, I began to see the humor in it. We watched the third movie and enjoyed it together. I tried mirroring her behavior thinking it would help her understand how it felt, but it only made things worse. We ended up laughing uncontrollably while interacting like Gollum and Smeagol. While this was funny and private at first, it's now happening in public too. It's become a continuous act, and ironically, the more we do it, the harder it is to stop. After a while, we were having dinner with her parents, and we were both speaking in our best Gollum voices. Her parents were in the kitchen, and when her mother came over to ask me something, I accidentally replied in my Gollum voice. It was incredibly awkward, and now my girlfriend teases me about it, which I guess is fair. Despite all this, there's a happy ending. I think I like my girlfriend even more now.